Welcome, everybody, to this webinar where we will be focusing on betting sponsors in football. And we've entitled it What's Next, or What Next, I should say. Because as you probably know, there's been recent news about betting sponsors being banned in the Premier League. And this goes in line with some of the other countries that have already put across these regulations in place. So that's going to be the focus of today. And in just a moment, I'll turn it over to Richard Lamb, who is joining us here. Richard is part of the SBI family. He collaborates with our Master in Football Business and Management, and he has a wealth of experience from his time in the football industry across a number of top clubs, including Manchester United, Inter Milan, West Ham, among other consulting roles he does and continues to undertake in the sports and the football industry. So Rich, it's great to have you here and welcome.
Hi Diego, great to be here. Thank you.
Fantastic. So in just a moment, we'll be getting started. I'll just introduce myself. My name is Diego Valdez. I'm the CEO at the Sports Business Institute Barcelona. And essentially what we do is we provide education for those that want to start or advance their career in the business side of football. We have a number of programs, short courses, masters that we deliver mainly online. And throughout the year, we have a number of programs that are specifically focused for those that want to work in the football industry. Now, the way we're going to structure the webinar tonight is we're going to talk about betting sponsorship in football, and I'll turn it over to Rich in just a moment. And then we're going to open it up for a Q&A. So it'll be your opportunity for your questions to be part of the discussion, and we're looking to have an engaging session. So we're hoping that you guys have some questions, some comments that you want to share with us once Rich is done with his presentation. At the end, I'll also talk about our Master in Football Business and Management, which is a program that we run every year. And I'll briefly talk about it, but for now, we'll move on to the subject at hand. Before doing that, we always like to know where our audience is connecting from. So in the chat box, go ahead and tell us where you're connecting from, whether it's the country or the city where you're connecting from. That tells us two things. It tells us that the sound is coming through correctly on your end, and also where you guys are, connecting from, which is always great to see people that are coming from, all parts of the world. So we have Mario from Germany, we have Luis from Mexico, we have Rich in the UK, Alba, hola Alba from Spain, Joaquin in Chile, Andre in Portugal, Beckham, how are you, Beckham, in Zurich? Right, Nadine, Switzerland and Portugal, okay. Shank, Toronto, Vanessa, hola Vanessa, nice to see you from Miami. Dennis, South Africa, Jack, England, good to see you, Jack. All right, so we have people from different corners of the world as usual, Rich. So it's nice to see that, the SBI community continues to thrive at a global level. Now, as I mentioned before, SBI, what do we do? Who are we? Just so you have an idea before we, move forward with the subject at hand. We're an institute based in Barcelona. We established in 2012. And like I mentioned before, we provide education programs for those that want to work in the business side of football. In our time, we've had, through our virtual courses, over 3,000 students from across 87 countries. So we can proudly say that we're a global institute and one that has a wide community and a very tight-knit family. We collaborate with top clubs, federations, leagues, tournaments, agencies, and professional football players, all with the aim of providing value to those that are part of our community, that are part of our courses. So that's SBI in a nutshell. That said, Rich, I'll turn it over to you for your presentation. And what I'll do is I'll assign you the presentation handle so that you can switch the slides. So let me know if you can switch the slides, and I will then turn it over to you, as I said before, so that we can get started with our webinar.
Brilliant. Thanks, Diego. Hi, everyone online. I know some of you, I see some familiar names, and some of you are on the course this year, and some from the course last year, but to anyone that's new to this, welcome. Really good to have you online. Ordinarily, the speaker would speak from somewhere between 45 minutes to an hour, but today I'm just going to speak for about 15 minutes. The purpose of this is not only to talk about betting sponsorship in football, but also just to give you a taster of what a class looks like here at SBI. So as Diego mentioned, the topic for tonight is a brief discussion about betting sponsorship in football. You might need to change to the next slide, please, Diego.
Perfect. Well, then let me go ahead and take the presenter role again, because that way I can go ahead and move. So tell me, Rich, whenever you want me to move forward.
Yeah,
and
whenever
I'll
you're
do
ready.
so.
Brilliant, thank you. So, okay, so what's going on? Yeah, next slide, please, Diego. So, as I'm sure many of you are aware, there's been a lot of discussion, particularly across much of Europe, around the morality of betting sponsorship in football. I'm just going to look at football in England. That's what I'm most familiar with. But obviously, this is a very international course. So Diego is going to also speak a little bit about Spain. But from wherever you are in the world, if you have any opinions on it based in your own country or a country that you're familiar with, then we're really happy if you want to add a comment in the chat box, or please raise your digital hand, or just interject and share some views. You know, we're always keen to listen to other people's views and experiences from different parts of the world. But generally, when we look at England, there's been a lot of discussion over the last few years around betting sponsorship here in the UK. And this has now come to a head where and the English Premier League have said that in 2025 and 2026 season, that betting sponsorship on the front of shirt is not going to be allowed anymore. So next slide, please, Diego. So as you see there on the first one, it's going to be phased out. So what that means is that you will probably see front of shirt sponsorship even in season 25-26, but there won't be allowed any new deals going forward in the future. So it will be slowly phased out, but 25-26 being the cutoff time. Now, this is part of a broader UK government review into gambling. And we'll see some of the numbers later on in the deck about why that's a difficult decision for the UK government. But it's worth also caveating this, that if you read the newspaper and you saw some of the slides there talking about a ban of betting in football, actually that's not really the case. What's being banned here is advertising of betting brands on the front of shirt. You can still have it on the sleeve, and you can still have it on the perimeter boards around the side of the stadium. So it seems to be a little bit of a middle ground, really, to try and please all sections of the stakeholders involved. So next slide, please. So what's the big deal? Okay, why are we looking betting, and why is it being phased out? Well, we see there, and again, I'm just focusing on the Premier League here, the English Premier League. So according to this slide here, and this is from a source called Brinkfire, we can see that of the Premier League clubs, of which there are 20, 42% have betting sponsorships on the front of shirt with betting brands. That doesn't include crypto, by the way. We're going to talk about that later. So that's betting there. And you can see the others. On the right-hand side, you can see some of the clubs that have betting. I think that's from last season, actually. And it also includes the championship clubs there. So what you need to see from this slide is the vast majority of club sponsorships on the front of shirt in the English Premier League is from the betting industry. Next slide, please, Derek. In terms of sleeve sponsorships, not as many, but there's still an additional 5.6%. So still quite a lot when you calculate it all in. Now, I didn't put this stat in the slides, but the UK government did a research paper, and when they evaluated last season of the English Premier League, they found that there was exposure to betting every 21 seconds. So if you watched every single game in the English Premier League from 21 to 22, every 21 seconds on average, you'd have been exposed to a betting advertisement, which is fine if you're an adult who can control himself or herself. But if you're a child, etc., then there's obviously some concern around that. Okay, next slide, please, Diego. Now, so what are some of the trends that we're seeing? Yep. So this is according to the Financial Times. As you can see there in the pink, I mean, I'm colorblind, I assume it's pink, but as you can see there in pink, that's sort of the percentage of gambling that we have in the English Premier League. So as you can see, prior to the year 2000, you had alcohol sponsorships, you had technology, quite a broad category there, and then some others, tires, etc., and electronic. Well, that's technology, I'm sure. But as you see, 2000, and part of this is obviously due to technology as well, rise of the internet and the ability to gamble online. We see a sharp increase in the number of betting sponsors that are involved in football. And as you can see there, ever since really about 2014, gambling has been the largest sector in shirt sponsorships in the English Premier League. Next slide, please. Now, just in terms of comparing it to alcohol, you can see there that really over the sort of 20 years ago, less and less alcohol sponsorships in the front of shirt, but that's been, as you can see there, intersected with the increase in gambling. So for those of you that might not be aware, 20, 30 years ago, there was a lot of pressure on sports associations to minimize their advertisements around alcohol. Prior to that, it was a big push against cigarette companies. For example, 30, 40 years ago, if you watched the Formula One, vast majority of cars were advertised by cigarette brands like Marlboro, Benson and Hedges, etc. Big pressure, societal pressure, that came off. Alcohol took over. Big societal pressure to get rid of alcohol, and then gambling took over. So it's worth thinking about those trends because we'll come to that again a bit later. Next slide, please, David. Thanks. Now, not just the English Premier League, we're the Sports Business Institute is focused on football as a sport and as an industry across Europe and at all different leagues. We don't just focus on the big five. So just to show there, the Championship is certainly not immune to betting sponsorships. You can see there 25% of the front of shirt on the Championship clubs is gambling as well. Now that is lower than the Premier League, but you have to remember that the Championship is sponsored by Sky Bet. So for any of you that know anything about sponsorship, you'll know that there are some exclusivity breaks, and so the Championship will probably have a deal with the Championship clubs that they reduce their exposure to gambling, not for any moral or ethic reasons, but because Sky Bet is the sponsor of the Championship. It was the same in the banking industry when Barclays was the sponsor of the English Premier League. You didn't see very many banking sponsorships in the Premier League because there was exclusivity around that. Next slide, please, Diego. Now, just to touch upon Europe, and Diego is going to talk a little bit more about Spain. But as you can see there, even across all of Europe, that, and this is according to Sportingpedia, you can see there that 11.2% of sports advertising in football comes from gambling, which is the highest out of all of them. So this isn't only an issue in the UK, but all across Europe. Next slide, please, Diego. But as you'll see, Europe has already, some countries in Europe have already started to deal with this issue. So Holland has already banned it. Turkey has already banned it. Spain, Diego's going to talk a bit more about this, 35% currently, but that will be banned starting, in fact, it started already, hasn't it, Diego? Yeah, so this slide is a year old, but so Spain, as of last year, has banned it, and Italy as well has banned sports sponsorship as well. So that led to, I believe it was the Guardian newspaper in England asking, does the Premier League have a gambling problem? And it shows some statistics and comparisons there with the Premier League versus other leagues across Europe and the big five there. Next slide, please. So, but it's also worth thinking about this from the different stakeholders' perspective, because when you read the newspapers or you see stuff online, it's very easy to take the moral view that yes, advertising betting is wrong because it it potentially could encourage people towards an addiction, which can have adverse effects on their financial situation. But let's think about this from the different perspectives of the stakeholders involved. So next slide, please, Edgar. So in terms of the betting industry, this is from the Financial Times. I'm not sure how clear that is on your screens, but so for the betting industry, football is the football betting, gambling on football as a product, is the biggest revenue driver for betting companies here in the UK. So, so the annual betting revenue generated by UK online betting, according to the Financial Times, is around £2.3 billion. That is clearly a lot of money. So in football, that's the most, just over £1 billion there. Second is horse racing, and you can see the list there for yourself. Now on the left-hand side, that is the total number. On the right-hand side is the percentage. So the percentage of football gambling of a year on UK online betting is 46%. So very, very high. So clearly the betting industry is not keen for front of shirt. They're very keen for front of shirt exposure. They're not going to be keen to be taking off the front of shirt because football gambling is such a big driver for their revenue. Next slide, please, Diego. But how about from the football club's perspective? Well, there's a list there. That's from Statista.com. So the top 6 clubs that we can see there, that's in terms of their front of shirt value, and this is what their sponsors pay. So Manchester City, the Etihad, they generate, and some of these numbers will be approximate because they're not public. Clubs like Manchester United, which is a public company listed on the stock market, so therefore that number is public. So Manchester City there generate something just over 65 million for their front of shirt. But the top 6, not involved in gambling. These are clubs that have truly global exposure, and they're able to generate revenue from industries in other sources. Industries that have, again, like these football clubs, a global footprint. Standard Chartered, clearly a global bank. TeamViewer is a global tech company. It's probably software on your computers all over the world. And Arsenal, Emirates Airlines, clearly global because they fly all over the world. But then once we get down to the number 7 downwards on the list, we see West Ham there. That's Betway, Everton, and obviously Brighton and Hove is American Express. Clearly not betting, but Brighton, American Express, their headquarters in the UK is based in Brighton. So there's some synergies there in terms of location. But apart from Brighton, we can see that below the top 6, you get an increase in the number of betting sponsors. And that's a big chunk of their revenue. So for a club like Everton, 10 million a year just from their front of shirt will be a high percentage of their total sponsorship revenue of a year. So these clubs are clearly going to be very reluctant to give that up because it's not a case of replacing your front of shirt sponsor 10 million with another company that's going to pay 10 million. The reality is that the huge investment by betting companies into the football industry has inflated the price of the front of shirt for the non-top the non-top 6 clubs. So any club number 7 and below, their revenue will potentially go down, their sponsorship revenue, because betting has hugely inflated their price. So you could see a club like Aston Villa, for example, or Kazoo is clearly not betting, sorry. Leeds United, for example, that number could go from 6 down to 3 or 4 or less because betting has inflated that number. Next slide, please, Diego. So now clearly this is 2017, 2018, but I just want to give you an idea of the challenge that many football clubs have. The impression that English Premier League clubs have in the media is that these are very, very rich clubs that generate huge amounts of wealth, and that therefore they don't need to have a front of shirt sponsor from betting because they have other revenue sources that more than cover that cost. Not strictly true. The top 6 there you can see from Manchester United down to Tottenham Hotspur. Now this is about 5 years old. I know that Manchester City is currently has the biggest revenue of any football club in Europe, but this still serves its purpose. So the average there you can see the top 6 are well above the average. But once you get below that, what you start to see is, even though these 14 clubs play in the richest league in the world, you can see that many of those clubs are very cash poor. So you take a club, for example, like Everton in 2018, their revenue was 189 million pounds, including everything, including stadium, broadcasting, sponsorship, absolutely everything, merchandise. But their cost was 160 million. So that means their profit's only about 29 million. But that's when you take away all the additional costs. So a lot of these clubs, they rely on this additional sponsorship revenue to cover the costs. And the biggest cost by far for a Premier League football club, or any football club really, is the players' wages. And so, you know, the sponsorship revenue is important to these clubs, not so the top six, but betting is an important part of the bottom 14 clubs' sponsorship revenue. Next slide, please, David. But of course, there's the fans. There's a lot of the media and a lot of the research focus is around the two main stakeholders of the betting companies and then the football clubs. But there's a very important third dimension in this, and that is the fans themselves. So this is according to footy.com. They ran a survey of 1,500 people that are football fans, and they asked them what they thought about shirt betting sponsorships. Now, 45% of those 1,500 people interviewed said that they wanted to ban betting sponsors on shirts. 29% said they don't buy shirts with gambling logos, and 31% said they wanted a non-betting sponsor for the front of their shirt. So, okay, 1,500 people is not very many people, but the survey is quite indicative that generally just under half of football fans would prefer football clubs not to, or their football club not to have a gambling sponsor on the front of shirt. Next slide, please, David. And this is according to a review that was conducted by the British government in 2023, where they concluded that 13% of the UK population were experiencing some level of gambling harm. Now, that's quite a vague term. What they mean by that, which explains later in the document, that doesn't mean that 13% of the UK population has an addiction to gambling. That's not what it means. It could also mean that, say, for example, someone in your family or your spouse or a close friend of yours is addicted to gambling, and that is having an adverse effect on you and your relationship with that person. So that's also including that 13%. But nonetheless, that 13% is a high number. And the excess costs of harmful gambling, according to the UK government, were estimated between 1 billion and 1.77 billion just for England, so not including the other parts of the UK there. So that's clearly a very high number. And so what we're seeing in football is pressure from the UK government to try and minimise the exposure that people see of betting in the Football League. The Premier League is reluctant to do that because the Premier League is made up of 20 clubs, and as we saw, 14 of those clubs rely on the sponsorship from betting, and the betting industry generates a huge amount of revenue, over £1 billion, just from football betting alone. So of course they're not incentivized to do that either. So this goes back to sort of the beginning of the first slide where I talked about front of shirt. There seems to have been a middle ground that's been found between the three stakeholders here, where betting has come off the front of shirt, but that doesn't mean that it's been banned. What we're going to see is more betting sponsors on the sleeve, and we're going to see even more betting sponsors on the perimeter boards, but also buying ad space as well. So, for example, when a game is broadcast on Sky Television during the halftime break, you also get ads that is sold by Sky, and you'll see a lot more betting companies buying those ad spaces. So we're going to continue to see a lot of betting exposure around the football advertising world. I think that's it, Diego. Any questions? Next slide, please. Yes, forgot the important one. So I'm not going to answer any of these questions. It was really, this is something we would discuss in the class, but it's just to give you an impression of what the class would be like, how it would be structured. So we would ask, during the Q&A session, we would ask a question about the limits of, say, for example, the limits of sponsorship. So I think what the betting in football really showcases is football in England, in other parts of Europe as well, but especially in England, is very much run as a business, less so as a sport. So, but are we seeing here with the English Premier League and the government's under the government's pressure to reduce the level of exposure of betting? Are we seeing the limits of football as a business? And this raises the questions of, well, what are the limits of football as a business? It also raises the question, to what extent are clubs responsible for their fans? Some people may argue, the fans that are adults, they have the right to choose whether they gamble. It's up to them. But some other people would argue that football fans are influenced by the football club, by their football club. And if a football club endorses a particular brand, then a fan may think that that means that the brand is safe or it's good to use. There was a recent case in the BBC where Sevilla FC was sponsoring a financial company, and one of the subsidiaries of the financial company was shown to be very fraudulent. So if anyone's interested, we can share that story in the chat box. But so to what extent do clubs have responsibility to conduct due diligence on the sponsors that they have in order to make sure that, if you like, there is a safe environment for the fans when the fans are engaging with the clubs? And to give you an example, at Inter Milan, the former owner, Mr. Moratti, he always refused any sponsorship with fast food or with fizzy drinks brands. So Inter Milan under Mr. Moratti, you would never see any of those brands sponsoring the club. Clearly, the football world has moved on, and finance is important. And then the third question is, should governments be more involved? Because we've seen here in the UK government pressuring the English Premier League to address the issue of gambling, and the Premier League has reacted to that. So does that mean that governments should be more involved in football, or should governments still let football run itself? I don't have answers to these questions, but I'll be really keen to hear if anyone does, and I'll leave it there, Diego. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Rich. Very insightful information. I won't go into much depth about Spain, but I do have some facts that are interesting to share, and it's very similar to what you just mentioned in England. In Spain, however, it came into effect as of the 2021-22 season, which, of course, it's important to note because it was precisely during the pandemic that it was announced and shortly after where it came into effect. So from a business standpoint, a lot of these Spanish clubs took a hit because, of course, as you well mentioned, the sponsorship revenue coming in from these betting companies was very strong, particularly for those clubs in the lower end of the pyramid in Spain. So definitely had an effect. Another thing to keep in mind, as you well said, Rich, is that it's a quote unquote ban, but there's betting companies that are still part of football or the industry. And in Spain, what you have is a lot of the clubs that will have agreements with, say, for example, Asian betting brands. So they may not have, as you said, the main sponsor on their shirt, but they will have an opportunity to have some regional partners that are betting companies. Overall, the figure is estimated that it cost approximately 90 million euros for the different sponsorships that were part of the first and second division here in Spain. And, as a result, they've had to move on and look for other sources of revenue or sponsorship beyond those betting brands. So interesting to note. Now, as you said, Rich, and for our audience listening in, what we wanted to do is wanted to give you a taster of what you would expect in a masterclass at SBI. And essentially, this is it. I mean, you talk about a subject, we bring forward a case, and the idea is for the participants to form part of the discussion. So we can turn it over to you for your questions. If you have any comments, questions that you'd like to ask us, and particularly, looking at what Rich has presented, feel free to post them in the chat. Let us know if you have anything in particular that you want to discuss, and we'll open up the floor for a few minutes. We don't want to keep you here very long. We wanted to make this webinar short, so we'll probably have about 5 minutes of discussion or questions, and then we'll wrap it up, and I'll talk about our master in football business and management. But Rich, there is the question that comes up about crypto. So where do you see the industry going forward? Because obviously this is a subject that everybody talks about today, and it's a trend that we're seeing, and that as you know from the course and from the different discussions and guest speakers that have been on, it's a subject that comes up often. So what is your take on crypto and where we're at today in the industry as far as football clubs are concerned, or football properties, I should say?
Thanks, Egg. Before I answer that, I was just going to add an extra point. You mentioned the betting sponsors from Asia. And of course, anyone who watches Premier League will see a lot of betting sponsors where the sponsorship is written in Chinese. Now, obviously, they're targeting a Chinese audience, but ironically, gambling of any form is banned in China and has been for many decades. So that's another issue that the Premier League or other European leagues probably should take into consideration, that whilst it's not illegal in their own country, should they really be engaging with companies that are promoting betting in a country where it is banned, and it's banned for very historical reasons in a place like China. But on the question of crypto, I mean, I'm no expert on crypto. I read something recently where one commentator was drawing parallels with crypto and gambling. Now I know that they're very different, but I think what the point that this commentator was trying to make was by saying that if you invest in crypto, you have no more certainty of making your investment or any profit back as you do as putting money on a horse race or betting on football. Ergo, it's no different from betting. I don't think that it's an exact parallel. I think there are differences between crypto and between gambling, clearly. But I think that the regulations around crypto are a lot more relaxed than if you're investing in some more traditional products. So I think that what we're going to see is, as betting starts to be phased out, we're going to see a lot more crypto sponsorship come in to fill that gap. What you notice in the sponsorship industry is that you'll have waves of sectors that invest in football. So maybe about 15 years ago, airlines were getting involved with sponsorship and started to inflate the price. They then dropped out. Well, not dropped out, they phased out their sponsorship. Then we saw watches, tires, and then obviously gambling, which we just spoke about. Now, gambling sponsorship revenues have already plateaued. The numbers that they're paying are not as crazy as they once were. So I think what we're going to see is we're going to see crypto fill that gap, and it already has done to a certain extent. But I think we're going to see more of it. So I personally see that once betting gets phased out of the front of shirt for clubs in the bottom, not outside of the top six, then I think we're going to see even more crypto fill that space. And then probably it will take about 15 to 20 years before the government give pressure on phasing that out as well. So and then something else will be there to replace it. But I do think crypto will fill the void that the betting will leave once it leaves football.
Right, very interesting. Well, we do have some questions coming in from our audience, and I'm going to make this more engaging. I'd like you guys to pose the question yourselves. So what I'll do is I'll unmute you. If you can't speak for any reason because you might be at work or you can't speak, just let me know and we'll do the question and we'll read it out. But I think it's always best when we do have a question, for context, for participation, for engagement, to bring in, the attendee himself or herself to ask the question. So I see that Dennis M has had a couple of comments or questions here. So Dennis, I'll go ahead and request an unmute. Let me know if you can speak, and then we're all ears to what you want to share with us and join the discussion. Dennis.
Hi, good evening. I can hear you very well. Thanks. Thanks for taking my question. My question is just really, we are just entering an era where betting companies are really aggressively moving into the sports market, and football in particular. I was just wondering, what happens a few years from now when our government also goes down the path where the UK government is going. What are the alternatives? Are there traditional industries that would still want to access the sports market or football in particular? That's really what I wanted to know. I see there's a huge move by different betting companies into the sports market and very aggressively. Thanks.
Thanks very much for the question. I think it raises a number of possible answers, actually. Number one is, and this is a critique of my own critique of the presentation, is what do I mean by betting companies? Because, of course, there's not just one industry. And in fact, there are betting companies pushing for the UK government to ban betting advertising in the UK. So traditional betting companies, those that are mostly offline, to those in the UK, you'll be very familiar with this. Companies like Ladbrokes, I believe another one is William Hill. These companies are pushing for the UK government to ban all these online betting companies because it cannibalizes their own revenue. So they're displeased at it as well. So we need to be clear on what do we mean by betting companies. So I've been talking specifically around online betting companies. Now, in terms of moving aggressively, actually, I think that from my own personal experience, in England, the online betting companies moved very aggressively into the football arena about 10 years ago. And one thing I noticed about 3 years ago, I was consulting for an organization. And what really surprised me was that they were running a process to identify a new betting sponsor. And the companies they were talking to, the online betting companies they were talking to, were just no longer throwing lots of money at sports betting. To them, what had happened is the online betting industry had started to already consolidate, where what had emerged was a number of companies, a few, not many, who had already started to dominate the market, had already made up most of their market share. And so what we see is, and this could be any industry, what you see is a lot of aggressive investment in advertising, particularly in football, when the market's very new, because you have lots of companies in the market all trying to get a greater market share. So they're always willing to pay more. If you like, it's a seller's market. What we've seen in betting over the last few years is the market's been consolidated. Those many companies have turned into just a few. For anyone that knows their economic theory, the smaller companies have gone bankrupt, or they've gone out of business, or they've merged with other companies. And what's left is just a few. So those few companies don't need to spend so heavily in advertising anymore because the market's settled down. So I think from an England or a UK perspective, I think the market's probably already topped out, which is why the clubs and the English Premier League now is saying, "Oh, okay, we'll take it off the front of shirt." That's just speculation, of course. Now, in other markets, for example, in the United States, I believe in certain states, and I'm certainly no expert in the US, but I believe in certain states, they are starting to relax the rules around online gambling, around sports betting. In which case, I think if that is true, then we are going to see very, very aggressive spend from online betting companies trying to get into the US market. Betway, which is the West Ham sponsor, for example, I was watching some US sports the other week, and I saw quite a lot of Betway exposure, not just in US sports, but in esports as well. So Betway is probably ahead of the curve there. But I think your point is very valid when it comes to places like the US. I think for somewhere like the UK, I think the market's probably already topped out.
Excellent question all the way from South Africa. Thank you, Dennis. We have Diego Palma. We also have Jared, who has a question. So Jared, I'm going to do the same. I'll bring you on. Feel free to unmute yourself, and when your mic is ready, it'd be nice to hear from you. And as I said, for context and for engagement, let us know if your mic is on.
Due to flu, but I'm also from South Africa. Good evening, Dennis. And so, whilst Richard was doing the presentation, I'm thinking like, if the advertising disappears from front of the shirt, just as an imagination, in terms of where does all that printing disappear to in terms of economical input? The cost to produce those jerseys. I know it's now going to go onto the sleeve, but potentially, but it's much, much smaller in terms of economic output. So if, I don't know, today it was just reported that online training companies has now totally been disrupted by ChatGPT, in the sense that the students don't buy textbooks anymore. And also, to try and compete with ChatGPT, it will be exercise in futility. So I'm just using the creative industry as an example of one of those that may be impacted should this disruptive decision or thinking proceed.
Thanks for the question. Yeah, in terms of the front of shirt, so that's a really interesting question, actually, because it's not something that many people consider, and certainly it wasn't something I ever considered until I had to do it myself. But there is a process, a schedule that what they call the technical partner, so the likes of Adidas, Puma, Nike, for example, they will give the football clubs that they are sponsors of a deadline. So they'll say to the CEO or the commercial director, you need to have your front of shirt sponsor decided and locked in contractually by, and they'll give you a date, because that's when they have to tell their factories, many of which are in Bangladesh, used to be in China, and other parts of the world. They'll say to them, they have to give their factories a deadline and for them to then print the shirts. And so what can happen sometimes, if you miss that deadline, if you're a commercial director and you miss the deadline for your front of shirt sponsor, it has big ramifications, because you can still have the players wear the front of shirt, because every football club will have the machine where you just put the shirt down and you stamp it down, you stamp the front of shirt image onto the jersey, so the players will still wear it. But clearly, when it comes to merchandise and retail, it won't be there. Now, we had this problem at one of the clubs I worked at, and the way that we got around it was, or I don't think it came to, I think we were considering, the way that we were considering getting around it was that the retail would already be, they'd already have manufactured the shirts. They wouldn't have a front of shirt sponsor on it, but when you bought the shirt, the retail clerk would print would print it on the shirt as the person bought the shirt. So it is a huge headache for commercial directors across football. They have a very, very strict deadline, which is why you see a lot of clubs rather have a very long-term sponsor, because it saves a lot of headaches. For some of the smaller clubs where they don't get much of a choice, they have to have a new front of shirt sponsor every year. It's a really big headache for the commercial director, because they have a very strict deadline that they have to meet, and it puts a lot of pressure on them. In terms of your second question around ChatGPT, to be honest, clearly for us outside the tech industry, it's a newish technology and one that's developing very fast. I don't think we're going to understand or see what the downstream effects of that are going to be for quite some time. You're exactly right when it comes to the publishing industry. I mean, I'm also currently doing a PhD, so from an academic perspective as well, it's going to have a huge industry on the education and the academic sector. But I think the same thing potentially could have been said about the internet 20 years ago, and that certainly made academic life a lot easier, because rather than having to spend months and months in libraries looking for sources, you can find it at the touch of a button online. But we'll see what the impact is going to be. It's clearly going to have a massive change around the world, and it's going to feed into every aspect of our lives. But I can't say for sure what it's going to look like in the future. Interestingly, on our group chat on WhatsApp for the academic year that we have at the moment, someone posted about a Rashford social media post that this person says was taken from ChatGPT. So that was something that went around on the WhatsApp group. Diego, I don't know if you want to talk a bit more about the WhatsApp group.
Yes, I'll do that in just a moment. I just want to acknowledge Nadine Santos, who says, excellent presentation. So thank you for your feedback, Nadine. And we also have Diego Palma. We'll bring you on in just a moment. But just to touch upon the point you mentioned, Rich, and in fact, maybe it's just a quick opportunity for us to talk about the Master in Football Business and Management, which is the program that we offer here at SBI every year, starting in October. It's a master that is aimed at professionals that want to develop, that want to grow, whether it's starting or advancing a career in the business side of football. We bring executives of the highest level to provide master classes, to be your mentors, to be your tutors throughout the year, so that you come out with a very rich understanding of the business side of football, not just from a content and knowledge side, but also from a networking, experience, mentorship perspective. So that's the master. In a nutshell, it's an online format in the sense that we have live virtual classes, but we have engagement throughout the week with, as Rich mentioned, with a WhatsApp group where the students connect with each other on a daily basis, whether it's for projects, for assignments, or simply to be part of a collaborative community talking about football and just sharing information. And obviously the language is 100% in English. We start next October, so there's opportunity for you guys to look into what we do. If it's the first time that you're coming across SBI, the duration of the master is 8 months, and as you can see, the fee there, 7,500 euros. There is an early bird discount if you get in touch with us and apply before May 31st. So anyway, if you want more information, feel free to touch base with us, and we'll be happy to talk about our master's program. But I don't want to go on a tangent without having the opportunity to bring in a few more of the people that are asking some questions. So Diego Palma, who I believe is from Ecuador. So Diego, let me just bring you on here, and hopefully you can unmute your mic. I realize it's daytime for you, so hopefully we don't catch you in the middle of work where you can engage with us with your mic. So Diego, Tocayo, let me know if you can hear me, and if so, please feel free to ask your question.
Sports. I work in my sports entertainment company in Ecuador. It's called Sport Trade. First of all, thank you for the time and for this fantastic presentation. I think it was very revealing. And you seem to be kind of in the future in comparison to us. Here in Ecuador, we are experiencing a huge upscaling and relevance of betting companies that are bringing in their capitals, maybe because they are experiencing this downscaling in Europe, perhaps. I don't really know. But what my question is, well, first of all, what should we expect as an impact in society? Because betting was banned from my country, for example, for the last about 10 years. So so this is kind of new for us, and now we're looking at up to 10 betting companies sponsoring different teams and the leagues and the competitions and the national team, etc., etc. So first of all, what is the impact, the societal impact that we should expect from this upscaling and relevance of betting companies in our country? And then, given the fact that even though I understand that it's not the case, and Richard was very clear about it, that it's not all of the clubs that have huge revenues and diving wealth, but you should understand that in South America and Latin America, resources are very scarce, and there are several developing football projects in South America that find a big chunk of their cash flow need in the betting companies. So what are the options that we have to replace this huge injection of cash from betting?
Thanks for the question. I mean, I think the way I would answer it is I don't think there is one definitive right answer to the question. And what I mean by that is it really depends on the perspective you look at, because you ask about what the societal effect will be. Well, clearly, as we can see in any country where gambling is legal, a lot of people enjoy it as a pastime, and a very small minority of those people will suffer from it. It's the same with alcohol. Most people can enjoy a drink. Some people, unfortunately, get addicted, and it has an impact on their lives and their lives of their family and the people around them. Now, the question is then, should it be banned for that reason? Well, I mean, I don't know. It's not an area I look in, but I think that there's other ways to look at this as well. And clearly, governments around the world see the huge potential for additional tax revenue they can make from it. As I mentioned, in the UK, I think I said at the beginning that the annual online gambling industry in the UK is over 2 billion a year. You know, the UK government take a big chunk of that as through tax, so they're incentivized to support it. Football clubs, I think one of the problems, and this is more a macro sort of view on the football industry, but many people that are football fans really only focus on their club. And so it's very easy to say, for example, if you're a football club of, you know, your local team, it's very easy to criticize them by saying, well, why have they got sponsorship of betting? It's not right. But it's also worth looking at it from the football club's perspective, which is they are one of many football clubs. And if betting is going to start investing very heavily in football, and you're the only club that says, well, we're not going to accept it, then it means that many others of your competitors are going to accept that money. The more money they have, the better players they can buy, they win more trophies. And then your fans are annoyed because you're not doing as well as the other teams. So whatever you do as a football club, whether you say no or you say yes, you're kind of stuck, really. It's not an easy path. But what I would say is, if I were the CEO of a football club, I would probably accept for example, you say Ecuador in this example. If I were a local club in Ecuador and the opportunity arose where there was betting revenue, I would probably take that revenue if the opportunity became apparent. But I would make sure that the money that was invested be used wisely. So, for example, what we've seen in the English Premier League is the vast majority, although the English Premier League, the revenues have gone up exponentially over the last 20 years. I mean, we're talking, it's gone up from a few million to billions of pounds. What some clubs have done very wisely, if they've invested in their infrastructure. Take a club like Leicester City. Leicester City won the league a few years ago. They've been hugely successful on the pitch. And they've taken that money and they've invested very wisely in their academy. They've invested in infrastructure. They've got one of the best training facilities in the UK and probably one of the best in the world. And other clubs have done the same. So yes, they're not doing very well at the league at the moment, but even if they got relegated, the reality is that the last 10, 15 years of success on the pitch is translated into a better experience for the fans and some fantastic infrastructure, not only for the fans, but for future players as well. So, but there are some other examples of clubs that have taken the increase in the revenue and they've just invested it in players. Now, that's fine if you have a good scouting team and a good manager that picks the best players that you can afford, but it doesn't always work that way. And for anyone that's interested, you know, Blackburn is a great example where they invested very heavily and the team didn't do very well because they invested badly, but they didn't take the Leicester City route. They didn't invest in infrastructure and bricks and mortar in a better stadium. So I think if I were in Ecuador in the position of some of the clubs there, I would take the extra revenue, but I'd make sure to invest it, maybe enlarge the stadium if it's enough money, build a better training facility, build for the future. So you're not just taking the money and putting it in the pockets just of players and agents. And I apologize to the players and agents on this call. But that's my view. I think investing in the future and infrastructure is the best way to take advantage of it as well. But then, of course, it's up to the clubs whether they then want to establish things like helplines. I don't think it's the club's responsibility to do that, but I think that the clubs can work responsibly with both the government and with the betting companies themselves. So say, for example, if they're working with an online gambling company, they could ask them, what are your policies around responsible gambling? Do you I mean, there were some betting companies that were fined by the UK government because they knew who their addicted customers were, and that if they hadn't bet for a while, they would go out and reach out to them and say, hey, you haven't bet in a while, why don't you bet? Now that's clearly irresponsible. So companies like that don't have proper infrastructure in place to be able to handle people that have got addictions, then I think that football clubs shouldn't work with them. They can work with betting brands, but they should choose the betting brands that are more responsible rather than just accepting whoever pays the most money. So there's two answers to that question, really. That was a long-winded answer, but hopefully it answered the question.
Fantastic. Diego says yes. Thanks for the answers. So perhaps we have time for one or two more questions and then we'll wrap it up. I see we have Francis, and then there was also another question above from, well, I'll look it up in just a moment. But Francis, I'll bring you on. And again, it'll be nice if you can ask your question yourself. So one moment, and let me unmute you. 1 second. Let me find Francis here. Here we go, Francis. So go ahead and let me know if your mic is unmuted.
Yeah, if the I mean, how do you think? How do you think about the professional player, club owner, coaches, join the company, manage their team, maybe lose? Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for the question. So as I understand the question, it's a really important point that you made, and I can't believe I didn't mention actually. What happens when football players purposely make bets themselves and then throw the game because of the bet? It's a hugely important question. I don't have the answers to that, I'm afraid. I think that the way that should be managed is via the leagues. So in this case, it should be the English Premier League that would manage that. It has happened, and clearly, and there are a few examples of it happening here in England, not just the Premier League, but across different leagues. And I think that isn't the responsibility of the sponsorship department. And I don't think that should be a reason to stop betting, investing in football sponsorship. But it is a huge problem. And I think that's a responsibility of the football associations, as well as the government and the police. Ultimately, it's a police issue. So I think as long as there's infrastructure in place and there are policies in place to be able to identify those problems and to be able to deal with them very quickly, I don't think it should stop the betting industry being involved in sponsorship. Because even if the betting industry is banned from football, it's still going to happen. For example, use China as an example. Betting is banned in China, but yet you still have incidences of players throwing games and what you mentioned there in the chat box, fake football. So I think then something needs to be done, and there needs to be infrastructure in place, but I don't think it's necessarily linked to sponsorship betting. Diego, I noticed there was a question from Philip from Nigeria. I don't know if you want to.
I saw that, yes, and he raised his hand. So Philip, will bring you in just a moment. As we are coming close to the end of the session, I do want to acknowledge everybody who's still here. So thanks to Alma, Andre, Annie, Beckham, Dennis, Ellen, Francis, Jared, Gustavo, Jack, Jaroslav, Jasank, Karis, Kofi, Mario, Max, Nadine, Penny, Sam, Sol, and Vicky for being here tonight, because we do appreciate your time. We do appreciate you being here and listening to what we have to share. So before wrapping up, I did want to acknowledge your presence and being here. That said, we'll finish off with our last question, with Philip. So Philip, let me know if your mic is ready to be unmuted and if you can ask your question. So please go ahead.
Hello, good evening.
Good evening, Philip. Welcome.
Oh, thank you very much. I really appreciate this opportunity you've given to me to be on this platform. I do get your mails regularly, Sports Business Institute, from Ima Brogan. Uh, Ima Brogan has been sending me messages and it has been educating. I join you regularly. I just want to appreciate you for the opportunity you've given to me to be here. I'm speaking from Nigeria. I've listened to the co-host, Mr. Richard. He has made vital points here concerning betting. It's a very interesting topic. Here in Nigeria, we have a whole lot of people. You have betting companies everywhere in Nigeria. Nigeria is known for sports globally, and it is an extension of football betting in Nigeria. And it's really massive business in Nigeria. But I'm so particular about the case of betting. From your analysis you've made, I saw 45% and a whole lot of that. That's a reaction from people, and it shows it's a very sensitive topic globally. Specifically about sponsors, looking at your research, I want to ask, what do you think will be the implication of betting sponsors taking over the sponsorship space completely? Putting in mind that we have a whole lot of people, a whole lot of companies trying to come into that space. So what do you think will be the implication of betting sponsors taking over the sponsorship space completely? Thank you very much.
Thanks, Philip, for the question, and thanks for the warm words. It's good to see that you keep getting those emails. I think it's a really good point that you raise, and this is important for all clubs. But unfortunately, not many clubs take it too seriously. And that's something that is called in the marketing world brand equity. So, for example, if you have a football club and they have 10 sponsors, but the sponsor that pays the most, by far the most, is a betting sponsor, then what can happen is that although the betting sponsor pays the most money, so you think, oh, okay, this is the most important sponsor, the reality is if your most important, most visible sponsor is a company that has low brand equity in an area like betting that has, again, low brand equity, it can have a detrimental effect on your ability to talk to other brands. So, for example, if I'm working for a football club where, as you say, Philip, betting is dominating the space, and I go to a brand like Coca-Cola or Pepsi or Apple or brands that really care about their brand image, they don't want to be associated with a club that is associated so much with a betting brand. And you can see that. Why does a club like Manchester United, Manchester City, Arsenal, Tottenham not have betting on their front of shirt? Of course, they could get more money from a betting brand for the front of shirt, but they don't do it because it's not just about one sponsor. It's about a portfolio of sponsors. And they know that their brand equity is very important to them. So if they suddenly have Hollywood betting, that's a bad example, Super Casino on their front of shirt, they know that a lot of their sponsors, be it Marriott Hotel, Pepsi, Hublot watches, they're going to pull out straight away because they don't want to be associated with what they would consider a low equity brand. So the commercial directors, the good commercial directors at the clubs that understand this, will look at the bigger picture, which is it's not just about one source of revenue, it's about all sources of revenue within the sponsorship portfolio. And one sponsor may pay more, but if they're going to dominate that space and they have a negative brand equity, then all your other sponsors are going to go away. And any potential chat that you have with bigger brands is going to be tarnished by that. So every club has a decision to make, really. Do they go with brand equity and try and build up their value proposition that way? Or do they just take the quick money? Unfortunately, a lot of the clubs just take the quick money. They don't have the luxury of of trying to build a brand 2 or 3 years in the future, because the reality is they could get relegated in 3 months. They've got to make the money now. So that is a challenge, but it's an interesting question you raise, and it's actually one that's a very, very important question in the football industry.
Excellent. Thank you, Philip, and thank you for those kind words. We'll be sure to pass on your feedback to Emma, who will be glad to hear that you're engaging with her through the emails that we sent out about our different initiatives. So thank you very much, everybody, for attending tonight. As we mentioned, this is a taster of what you could expect to see in a masterclass for the Master in Football Business and Management, which we offer every year starting in October. As I mentioned, this is the general information. If you want more details, please get in touch with us. Our team will be happy to send you info for you to consider. This is the general information, as I mentioned before. If you're looking to optimize your knowledge, to expand your network, to gain practical experience, to have personalized mentorship that will guide you as to what your next steps may be in your career path, and of course, a flexible learning style that allows you to do this in parallel with other professional or academic commitments, or personal commitments for that matter, this program is one that perhaps might be the one that could interest you to fill those gaps. We like to say that we're recognized for quality and optimized for success. Here you see some of the names, some of the more high-profile players that have done our course in the past. One of the things that we're very proud of is that even though working in the football industry can be competitive, can be challenging, many of our students, whether it's shortly after or soon after completing their master's program, are able to work in different organizations, and we're very proud to say that many of our alumni today work for many of the top clubs, leagues, federations, agencies, law firms involved in the football industry. As I mentioned, we have an early bird discount, a special rate that ends May 31st. So if you want to know more about how you can benefit from that, get in touch with us. Our contact information is here. You can always send us an email or reply to the email that Emma sent you regarding this webinar. Somebody from our team will get back to you and will provide you with additional information. That said, thank you for participating tonight. We really appreciate you being here and engaging with us tonight. And of course, thank you, Rich, for providing your insight, your knowledge to our audience tonight on this fascinating subject, which I'm sure is one that we'll continue to hear about more in the coming weeks. So I'll turn it over to you for any final comments, Rich, and then with that, we'll wrap it up for tonight.
No, just say thanks to everyone for listening. Thanks for joining online. For those of you already on the course, I look forward to chatting tomorrow evening. And for those of you that are not, look forward to hopefully seeing you next year.
Enjoy your evening, your afternoon, or your morning, and we hope to see you again very soon. All the best, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.